The Pacers are back from Paris. What can we learn from this trip? And the Pacers now have to make a very tough rotational decision or two regarding Ben Mathurin, Aaron Nesmith, Jarace Walker, and Ben Shepard. What should they do? A great discussion with Jon Washburn as we figure all that out today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, y'all. Welcome to a new week and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today a ton to discuss as the Pacers come back from Paris and have a huge decision to make in their rotation that I've talked about a lot on the show and will continue to with more people. At the start of this episode, a lot of talk about Paris, what we learned about the Pacers in their two games against the Spurs, how they played, how they adjusted, things they did not do well, and what it could mean for the team going forward that they are coming back from another continent in the middle of the regular season. But then a very meaty discussion on the rotation. Aaron Nesmith playing 20-plus minutes a game now. What does that mean for him and Ben Mathurin? Who should start? I know that's been discussed a lot, but this was probably the best discussion I've had, I think, about it on this podcast. It actually made me consider if my stance was right. And then we talked about who shouldn't be playing if they're going to keep playing 10 guys, Jarace Walker or Ben Shepard or someone else. And that was also, I think, the best discussion I've ever had on that topic. If I knew how good they would be, I'd flip the order of the conversations in this podcast. But it's all very good, and Jon was very kind to give me lots of time to talk about it. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. Let's just get right to it. The Pacers, they're back from vacation / business trip / they went to Europe for 7 days in the middle of a season. Still super weird. And the games were super weird. 2 30-point games, one that made the Pacers look awesome, one that made them look awful. We're going to talk about what the Pacers learned from there and what we're starting to see develop of the Pacers rotation with Aaron Nesmith back. Is it the right choice to have Jarace Walker not playing very much? Joining me to talk about all of these things, a man who did not push Saquon Barkley out of bounds today, it's Jon Washburn, the Dean of Mortgages. Jon, what's up, man? How are you?
Dude, so happy to be here. Thanks for having me again on the podcast.
What do you think of that rule? I am a hater of that flag because you can't watch the guy's feet. I have a football take on a basketball podcast, which is not good, but I hate that rule.
I hate it too, especially, I mean, I hate it on anybody, but especially on running backs as good as Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, you can just cut up field.
Yeah, I mean, he's incredible, and he's so agile and also so powerful. So you want to make sure that he's definitely out of bounds. And like when you slow that down on super slow motion replay, his first foot hadn't even touched down yet. So that was rough. Just tough break for the defensive player. I mean, I don't think the Eagles needed much help anyway. But after that, I mean, that was definitely pretty rough.
I'm proud of you specifically for not committing that flag. The Pacers in Paris had some flags, including an awful defensive game on Thursday and then a terrific 3 stretches of play on Saturday and some awesome adjustments both between and in games, and also just like a what the hell just happened level game the day before. How do you walk away feeling when a team goes +8 against an opponent in 2 games? That sounds great, but they have such a humiliating defeat and such a dominant win back-to-back like that.
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't really know what to expect. Wemby in front of his home crowd. I feel like the Pacers have been playing so well.
Mm-hmm.
But Wemby in front of his home crowd, it's just like kind of a weird experience, a weird week. You're happy to be in Paris. You're doing all of these really cool things. Honestly, to come away from there 1-1, it's probably fine, right? It's probably fine. To get your doors absolutely blown off the way they were blown off in the third quarter of that first game. That was a little bit discouraging, especially with how well the Pacers have been playing defense as of late. I mean, one of the very best teams by terms of defensive efficiency over the previous 10 games in the entire league. And then for that to happen, at the same time, it was like, were there some things that we were doing poorly, that the Pacers were doing poorly? Sure. But also the Spurs were just, it was very clear, like they were playing some very special basketball. That was, a glimpse of 2 years from now, or I don't know, 9 months from now when Wemby is the best player in the world. Like, what are we all going to do? There's nothing any of us can do. Like he's blocking shots on one end and hitting pull-up threes on the other, and just like it was just absolutely insane. And his whole country's there cheering him and going bonkers. And it was a game we've all seen before where the momentum starts flowing and there's just literally nothing that the Pacers could do to stop it, specifically in that first game. So all in all, to come out of there 1-1, especially after with a great win on the second, in the second game, I feel okay with it, especially with how we've been playing recently.
Yeah, I think that take away that they're in Paris and the WNBA effect and everything. Like a 24-win team losing to a 20-win team is not like weird, right? At this stage of the season. But the way they lost was just like, oh my God, they had no chance after halftime. They looked awful. So the Spurs entered Paris as the 24th ranked 3-point shooting team in terms of percentage in the league. They're not 22nd because of one hot game and one mediocre game, right? Like they were on fire. And for those who know who Dean Oliver is, Dinolytics, one of the GOATs, used to be in the public space and worked for a team. Now he's back in the public space. He has the NBA daily summaries. I think he's in charge of it, that ESPN does. And the first game of the series, right? So what this is designed to do, it uses his 4 factors thing that he came up with forever ago to break down like how much of a margin of victory is from specific aspects of the game. Of the Spurs' 30-point victory, the estimation of the way he does it is that 20.8 of those points came from just the 3-point line, right? Like they were on fire in that game. And so the Pacers still would have lost by double figure. Well, actually 9.2 points, just under double figures without that, right? Wemby was a terror inside the arc, and the Spurs did a good job at the foul line that game. Like they did a good job on the glass. Like they deserved to win, but I rewatched that game and I don't think the Pacers played well defensively, like some very, very easy drives for Castle and Trey Jones and some other guys. But they also just like, what are you going to do when Vassell's that hot? And in the second game, Vassell scores 6 points and Andrew Nembhard plays better defense. And in that game, the margin of 3-point was plus 10.4 for the Pacers, which is still only half as much as the Spurs had. According to the stuff I'm talking about, you can find the stuff on ESPN's Analytics Daily Summary page. The turnover battle saved the Pacers second game, which is true among many things. But it is fascinating to me that, like, yes, they played bad, but if the Spurs just shot like a normal percentage, they'd have lost by like 12, probably 10, 14, and everybody was like, oh, Wemby played awesome and they lost. Like, that's okay. And then they adjusted and they played better in the second game. So it's really hard for me to walk away concerned about that margin of victory. I don't think they played well in that game, though. What I'm more concerned about is this. This team is great at adjustments between games. We saw this when they beat Boston after losing to Boston. Guess what? They beat Miami after losing to Miami. They've been very good at the second game of these 2-game sets. The problem is they're always adjusting after a loss where it's like, oh, they stopped trying after halftime, or, oh, the Celtics just pulled their pants down for 48 minutes. Like, it's good that they're good at the second thing. It's bad that they put themselves in position to need to do that every time. So on one hand, I think that from a playoff perspective and like adjusting is good, and they're very good at that. Like Rick's pretty good at that stuff, but they shouldn't need to do it to the extent that they do in some cases. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And the other thing is, I often wonder too, and this might be too much to ask. And I don't want to be hypercritical, but I also sometimes wonder, like, you know, where was the adjustment in the middle of the game to try to potentially stop that run? I don't know if there was an adjustment in the middle of the first game in Paris where the Spurs were shooting the lights out. But I have wondered that at times, specifically this season when we're playing against a zone and our offense looks good and someone switches to a zone and we just look like absolute garbage, right? And then the next game a team will come out and play zone and we look better against the zone,
Yeah.
right? But it's
Very
almost
similar.
like this stuff sometimes happens, and like you're saying, we go into we finish the game, we go in, we work on it. The next game we look a lot better. I don't know what happens in the middle, in the middle of that game, which we just forget how to play basketball. The offense kind of clogs down a little bit. Don't want to talk, get too bogged down to that. I know we're talking about the Spurs game specifically here, but yeah, Rick is great at in between games adjustments, and it was great to see the Pacers rebound on national television in front of a lot of fans on Saturday afternoon to put up a nice victory yesterday.
That's a good micro point about zone. And a lot of times they'll have those. I think it's happened 2-3 times this season where like the story of the game is how bad they played against zone, right? Like it's not entirely why they lost, but a big part of it. And I'll ask players after the game, like, I know I've asked you this before, but again, zone defense, like why? What's going on here? Because I see what they do. Like they eventually put a guy in the middle, sometimes very quickly, and like they're kind of doing what I feel like you should do, but they still like it's like pulling teeth for them to get as good of shots. And some of them say this, they're like, yeah, it's not even necessarily that we don't know what to do. It's just like it breaks up your rhythm, right? Like you have a
Mhm.
plan, you have a game plan, and then you're like, oh, wait, let me stop and think about what we're supposed to do against this instead. And so when I zoom out from that, I'm like, oh, they're like a rhythm team. And we know that because
Yeah.
when they play bad, they continue to play bad. And when they play great, they continue to play great. And that's a good thing at times, like when you're clicking or when your leaders are setting the tone for good rhythm, you look awesome. That's why they've been pretty good these last couple seasons, right? But at the same time, it can lead to just like if you have no rhythm or you can't figure out how to get it, like in the third quarter of that first game, or a lot of that first game, really, right? They were losing after every quarter. Then it's so hard for them to figure it out until they get the one adjustment down. And so I do think that's a good point about the zones. And the adjustment in this specific case was not against a particular defense. It was one very large guy in Victor Wembanyama
Sure.
who that just blew up like that. You could tell they wanted to get into the paint. They love playing paint to great, and they couldn't. They couldn't set their offense up that way. And then, okay, Myles Turner, come set some screens. Wait, this isn't good. We didn't create anything from this. It took some time there. And I know they knew that going into the first game. I'm not like these idiots. They weren't ready for Wembanyama. It's just they adjusted very well. But they played awful and then they played great. And 3 of their 4 series this season where they've played the same team twice in a row have been that lose the first, win the second. The Cavs game notwithstanding, or the Cavs series, excuse me, notwithstanding. I believe you were at the first one of those. I might be wrong about that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I walk away from Paris the same thinking of like they're very good at this adjustment stuff, but they dig themselves that hole the first game where they have to do it. But the situation of Wemby being that good, the shooting they had, the environment, the like we're in Paris in the middle of the season. It's
Right.
just it was different, even though it does show a theme that this team has had. Everybody, short little breaks. We can talk about FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown score, calling who the MVP is going to be, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that is the icing on the cake. Download the app, head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's on FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59.
Yeah. Well, it's maybe even to go back a little bit on what I just said, in the second game, right? We're playing quite well in the second game. We go into halftime. I think we had a 15 Pacers. I'm sorry, I keep
Yep,
using the we.
that's
I've been a Pacers
okay.
fan since I was very, very young. I've watched
You have a
almost every
Pacers
Pacers
jacket
game.
and hat on. You are
Yeah,
okay.
I know. Uh, I've watched almost every Pacers game this year with my son, and we are all about the we in my house. Um, I'm sorry, my camera just got a little bit blurry. It does this sometimes. But so the Pacers go into halftime with a 15-point lead, and the Spurs made what I thought was a very good adjustment at halftime. They came out and
Don't
they
worry about it.
took Wemby off of Myles Turner, and they put him on Pascal Siakam, and that
Yeah.
kind of bogged up the Pacers' offense in the third quarter. I think the Pacers got a 17-point lead, and then the Spurs chipped away, actually took a 1-point lead in the third quarter. And the Pacers offense was not getting the quality of looks that it had been getting for the entire first half.
Agreed.
Clearly the Wemby on Siakam adjustment worked quite well, and it threw the Pacers, as they often tell you when you ask them about going to zone, it threw the Pacers offense off their rhythm. And I think at that point, what we needed was Haliburton to just kind of go and go crazy, and he did, and it kind of sort of saved the day. And once he put the Pacers back on their footing, and they found their rhythm again. And at that point, it didn't really matter who Wemby was guarding, and they sort of found their footing again, and we started getting good shots after he scored. What was it? 14 consecutive points and 18 points in the last 6 minutes of the third quarter to kind of put things back right. And then the whole fourth quarter, the offense looked better again. But that, I guess maybe the adjustment is just, hey, Haliburton, can you score more points in 2.5 minutes than any Pacer has in the last 25 years? Maybe we should just go for that adjustment more often.
I've been thinking about that second half, whatever you want to call it, the first 9 minutes of that half for a while since that game, because so they switched Wemby onto Siakam, and they not the whole time, but they kept screening with Siakam, and they were struggling to score. And the quick adjustment was like they took Siakam out earlier for Toppin, and then they brought Siakam in at the end of the quarter for Toppin so he could cook then. But on one hand, if pretend they switch Wemby onto Siakam, and then the Pacers are like, oh, great, let's set screens with Myles Turner now. Like, one, Siakam's not providing the same spacing there on the weak side. Two, you don't think the Spurs mentioned that when they talked about this adjustment at halftime? They're like, hey, if they just start to screen with Turner instead, do this or that, right? And two, let's pretend you do keep screening with Siakam as the Pacers did, and instead of what actually happens is they score 7 points in the first 3 trips. It might just end. Like, the Spurs might just be done with that strategy. So I guess I kind of get why they kept doing that, maybe a little too long, and then they did the rotation adjustment. But yeah, that was just like another part of what it takes to adjust in game. Like, I was surprised they went to Toppin. Like, Pascal shot better than Obi this year, but it was the right move. Not necessarily because of the immediate, but because late in the quarter when they could get Pascal back in, they were unstoppable for 3 minutes, and that won them the game. And that's what Paris was all about. Like, oh, the adjustments were good, and they figured out how to beat a team that had them solved for a night. Zoom out a little bit for me for a sec. You mentioned this at the beginning. Is the league just screwed? Like, this kid is he can do everything already, right? Like, what's gonna when he has good shooting teammates, or like one guy besides Chris Paul who can dribble towards the basket? Like, what are you gonna do? Because how many times, I mentioned this on my post-game pod after the last game, would like any player, not even a good player, like Mamu, would dribble towards the basket, and your instinct as a defender is, oh, I should step up and guard the ball so he doesn't get a layup. And then he just throws it as high as he can, and it's a free 2 points for the Spurs. And they have like no one who can dribble fast towards the rim. Like, if they get anyone good at that, or any shooters, or both of that in the same player, is everyone just screwed? Like, the Spurs look kind of good now.
I think yes. I very simply yes. I think the league is screwed. There's nothing you can do with the kid, and like it's a real conundrum, because he seems to really care, and he seems to work on his craft too, and he's also unselfish. He seems like a great teammate. I actually came away, because I watch the Spurs when I can, but I don't really watch the Spurs that closely. You know what I'm saying? So I watched them for 96 minutes pretty intensely while they were playing against my favorite team over the course of a couple days. And I watched them in a way like, how are we going to try to stop this kid? The thing I actually came away from most impressed after these 2 games, that I didn't even know he had this in his bag, as it were, he's a great passer.
Yes.
Some of the passes he was making for his age, I was like he's not Jokic, but he like some of the passes he was making, the touch on his passes, the passes he's making over the top, the passes he's making across the court to find guys not just in the short corner, but in the cross court out of double teams. Like, this guy truly does have it all. I mean, he can shoot, he can pass, he can dribble. He's the best defender in the league already, in my opinion. Like, he really has no weaknesses. No doubt. I mean, like, it's just it's a joke how good he is. And barring injury, knocking on every piece of wood here in my office, I think the league is screwed, and he's gonna whatever he wants. The world is his oyster for sure.
Yeah, if the Pacers weren't going to win the 2023 lottery, having that be a Western Conference team is very good news for them.
Yes,
because he's amazing. And like, I talked to Doug McDermott about this last year, because I just get googly when he does the pass where he's so tall he drops it like straight down. Like, it's the weirdest looking pass. Nobody does that. And it works. It's amazing. And so I'll give the Pacers credit for that too. They figured out, okay, Turner, you're going to pick him up full court. You're going to cover him when he's trailing. You're going to have to run a lot. Like if you had to do that for a full series, I would expect Myles Turner would shoot 36% that series and average like 9 points a game because that's a hard defensive assignment. But they did figure out how to do that for a game, and they matched their minutes, and it worked really well, which is the opposite of what I thought they should do. And this is why I'm an idiot who holds a microphone instead of actually doing any coaching in basketball. I thought they should try to put Siakam on him to try to just use low center of gravity, go for steals, and that didn't matter. He was just amazing anyway.
Yeah.
Here's the other Paris thing I want to talk about now. A lot of people talked about like how this could disrupt their season, and I think people like talked about it too much for the 2 games they just played because the Spurs were going through the exact same things, right? They also had to travel to France. They also had all the events. They also, had it's a business trip, but like we're in Paris, we're going to do some fun stuff, and they probably had it even more distractingly because Wemby had, they went to his childhood accords and all this stuff. So there were lots of events and distractions for both teams, right? I would call that a wash for these 2 games. Where the actual impact can be felt for a season is now when they come back and have to reacclimate to the U.S. time. Well, their opponents did not have to do that. So, and they have now 4 days off again between games, which we saw early in the season helped them, but certainly can disrupt their momentum and maybe disrupted the Pacers and Spurs momentum, but they're playing each other. So it's okay. It's a wash for those games. Now, come Wednesday is when I think you'll see if this is actually going to impact the Pacers in any way. And every team that's done an overseas trip is like, yeah, it took us a bit to, get the body clock adjustment going, including the Pacers with their India trip in 2019, but like the Warriors with their Japan trip this year, even teams that just go to Hawaii, right? So I do way too much talking and lead up to this to say, what do you expect this to look like now for them? They don't play till Wednesday against Detroit. They're lucky that their next 2 games are pretty spread out and both at home. So they'll be in one time zone for like a week now. But do you anticipate this having any sort of short-term or long-term issues?
I think so. I think it will. The older I get, when I travel out to Arizona quite a bit for work, and that's just a 2 or 3 hour time difference for me, depending on, Arizona is the only state in America that doesn't, roll back the clocks or whatever. So sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3 hours. And just a 2 or 3 hour time zone trip for a couple days takes me like a week or 2 or 3 sometimes to get reacclimated. So I do think it's going to mess with them. Fortunately, we do have some of the best depth in the NBA. I know that's something we're going to talk about a little bit. I don't think it's possible for it not to affect us, right? I'm happy that the schedule's spread out a little bit. I'm happy that we've got a couple games back to back here at home, but I just don't think it would be possible to have this have no effect. So what does that look like? Does that mean that we go on a 3-game losing streak? I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if we look a little bit flat, if the Pacers look not quite as good either on offense or on defense as we have looked during this recent stretch of 12, 15 pretty good games we've had recently.
I agree. They, I think, are, I don't know if lucky is the right word because their schedule was hard early in the season, but they like to fit in a week where you're playing twice, right? They played the Saturday, they played 2 games in Paris, and they don't play till that Wednesday. So they really played twice in like 9 days. To fit that into a regular season, that means you have to have a part of your schedule that's very condensed. They have the opposite thing as the Spurs. The Pacers have played 45 games now. It's actually not that unique in the league. Like there's a couple teams that have played 44. A few teams that are very fortunate have played 43. The Bucks are about to get hammered by scheduling. The Spurs are in the 43 group, right? So they are going to have a backloaded part of this. They have 2 more games to go in the Pacers. The Hornets have played 42. That's because they were in LA for wildfires time when their schedule got delayed. So they're going to have some brutal schedule thing coming up. But regardless, the Pacers already dealt with more of the schedule condensing than the Spurs, which they're fortunate about, I think. But the Pacers still have somewhat of, like 45 still probably a little on the low end. I think it's below the median right now in terms of teams. So they're going to have a little bit of condensed schedule still going forward. That's something they'll have to deal with. And I agree with you. Like you say, you even like teams have trouble with in the United States time zone adjustments to games right now. Imagine doubling that effect. And yes, you get, again, it's great that they get 4 days right now, right? They didn't look not sluggish, but like Myles Turner said it when I asked him the Wednesday before their first game in Paris, I was like, hey, how does this affect your body clock? Right. That we were talking to them at 7:30 a.m. Eastern time, which was 1:30 Paris time, I think is 6 hours. Right. And 1:30 is usually about when they practice when they're here. So that makes sense. Like, I get that you'd want to be on that daily schedule, but that also means that was like what they're used to as 7:30 a.m. And so I
Right.
said it, I was like, how does this affect you? He was like, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, like I'm tired, right? And that I'm glad he's being real about that, because now they have to do the opposite adjustment. And maybe it's easier when you're going the other way, but you gain the time going back home, which is good, but then you get home and you're not tired and it's nighttime. So I just am very curious how this will look this week. I think this will be harder than actually playing in Paris. And I personally think, one, you're right, that having extra depth helps, but everybody on that depth will be dealing with this problem. And the other
Right.
thing, I think this could be just a short-term thing, because this will come out on Monday. They only play 2 games in the next week before they go to Utah, and that's when things get tough. They go to altitude and immediately have a back-to-back. And they have the
Yep.
2 back-to-backs between now and the All-Star break, right? It does get hard, but they do have this week at home to kind of like breathe and settle in a bit. So I think it'll be a short-term blip, but I don't think it's crazy that these next 2 games, and maybe the next 3, because they play in Utah after that, you're like, oh, this is a little gross. And that sounds excusey, and I'm gonna be honest, it kind of is. But these are people whose like rhythm and body is like this. It is the product. So while it's an excuse, it's totally relevant to how they're gonna play.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah, I honestly, I don't have a whole lot to add.
That's okay.
Um, yeah, I think the first game will not hurt as much as the second game, right? I feel like
Good point.
they might look okay, the first game back in Detroit, and for me, the jet lag always hits me a couple days later. So I would be, if I was making a prediction, we look good in game one, better than expected in game one, and then game two, uh, we throw up one of our famous awful Friday night performances.
Hey, they're gonna be ready for the Detroit game for lots of reasons.
Yes, I agree.
Detroit happens to be, John, the location of Aaron Nesmith's return from injury, which now leads to the final thing I want to ask you about, and will be the biggest topic for this team for probably the next couple weeks. I've been asked about it every time I do radio stuff. I've talked about it on this podcast now 3 times, including this conversation. Aaron Nesmith is back. He just played over 20 minutes for the first time in Paris. Full stop first. That's great. He's good. That's good for the Pacers. Now let's take this a step further. There are 2 discussions that come from this. One is the smaller one of who should start between him and Mathurin. Both of them are going to play 20, 25, 30 minutes in a game. Not a huge deal. They can close based on matchup. I get that it might matter to them or like internally or whatever who starts, and that starting 5 this year has been great, but I'm not as concerned about that, even unless you have a very strong take. What is more interesting to me is they were playing well, and they have 10 guys who are all playing at least moderately well at some times of this season. And one of them is now going to not play either at all or very much. And that would appear to be Jarace Walker, who probably would not have played in the second game in Paris, which would have been his first missed game of the season, by the way, if they didn't win by 38 and have garbage time to have him not play. It's great that after last year and everybody said, oh, this is stupid that Jarace isn't playing, that he's played in all 45 and injuries have been a big part of that. But now they have to make this decision. And I predicted that Jarace would be the guy who loses minutes. A lot of lineup data suggested that'd be the case. A lot of their decision making in the past suggested that'd be the case, regardless of what I think and what the tells have been. One, do you actually think it matters in terms of a serious discussion on the play of the team who starts between Nesmith, Mathurin? And 2, how would you do the rotation? Would you play 11? Would you bench someone else? How would you handle all this?
I think it does matter who starts, and I would start Aaron Nesmith for a couple of
Ooh,
reasons.
okay, let's go. I took the
First of
opposite take.
all,
I'm ready.
okay, yeah. So first of all, um, Aaron Nesmith adds a little bit of extra oomph from like a fire standpoint
I do agree with that.
defensively. That I I'm not. I just sort of like it. I like it with that unit. I like it with that lineup, and I also feel like it puts the ball both in Haliburton's and Nemhard's and Siakam's hands as playmakers, like 5% more, just with that lineup, right? You don't need as much playmaking from that third perimeter player when you have those 3 players on the floor. I feel like I kind of just want a floor spacer and a guy that's big and can play defense. And I also love his intensity. Plus that moves Mathurin into what I personally believe is his most natural long-term role with this team, which is the sixth man scorer, probably guy that finishes 50 to 60 games a year for you, but sixth man guy. All right. So I believe I would put Nesmith back into the starting lineup if you feel like Mathurin can ever embrace that role. If you think that Mathurin needs to start because, like, in his mind, he's like, if I'm not a starter, I'm not valuable enough. Okay, maybe Nesmith is the type of guy that can embrace being the bench guy, right? And I'm not with the team enough to know, well, the chemistry issues that are going to be there, but just like from a sort of overall team fit, that's how I would answer that question first. If you want to follow up on that before we get to the next
Yes,
question. Yeah.
I do. Okay, those are good points. And to be clear, even though I've said I think I would start Mathurin, I just have something in my gut telling me that Aaron Nesmith will become the starter again at some point. Like the playoff success is kind of, if you wanted to say so, it's just kind of like the trump card of like, we know that chips down this group works in high stages. And I agree with you that the shooting is valuable and defense is good in any lineup. And hey, if you can make 40% of your threes a guard, doesn't matter who the other four players are, like you usually will fit in a lineup. That's great. Okay, I have no issue with that. Here's why I went the opposite way. The stuff you said about like if Nesmith is a fit thing in past years, what I've said is I actually agreed with you. Like Mathurin with the last year, I advocated for Mathurin being with the bench being the best thing for him because he could have the ball more where he's better, right? That's duh. If Ben Mathurin has the ball, that's where he's at his best on offense. The bench groups allowed him to do that. But this year, especially since they've been winning, I have been very impressed by, and as the team, him not needing the ball to be as good, right? The defense has been better. The catch and shoot quickly ability has been better. And the starting five with him out there has been like, oh, this is like the best, like a top five lineup in the league. And so the long-term Pacers ceiling probably requires Mathurin to be that kind of guy and blending it with what he can be as that scorer type, right? So yes, I do agree with you that like right now and like the most likely I would say projection of Mathurin if he's on the Pacers his whole career is like like a turbo great sixth man, and that is not insulting. I know I get why people think that, but it's not. Whereas somewhere else it would be a different role potentially. But if he is the guy that we've seen when he's at his best this year, that's like the first steps towards that blend of what they need him to be and what he has shown. And Nesmith can fit in any lineup with the bench and he can close games, and that's great. And they'll still play equal minutes. But that's not like that, it's more like a long-term pick to me because I do kind of think in the short term, you're probably right that the Nesmith five is better. But if I felt like one of them, I think a tiebreaker could be if I felt like one of them with the bench would make the bench better, then that's who I would decide not to start. But that also isn't the case to me anymore, right? That has also kind of drifted away in the way that was not the case last year. So that's why I think I would just stick with what's rolling. But Carlisle said it best. Like someone is getting screwed. Either someone playing great got hurt and is not starting anymore, or someone played great filling in as a starter and then gets benched for no reason other than that guy gets healthy. Like it sucks for someone, but if neither of them care, they're going to play a lot. It's not really a problem, I think.
I think a lot of your points are really good. I think the thing that brought me back around to why Aaron Nesmith should start is, so I think a lot of times we think about this from a what's better for Nesmith versus what's better for Mathurin sort of perspective.
Yeah.
I want to think about it from a what's better for Haliburton and Siakam perspective.
That's a great point. That is a good idea.
And from my perspective, there have been too many times this year where Haliburton has been a little bit too passive. You've seen the Pacers numbers when Haliburton takes 15 shots versus when he doesn't take 15 shots.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's been more passive than he ought to be because he looks around and he's got more great scorers with him, right? When he's sharing the floor with Mathurin so much, and it's not because Mathurin is taking bad shots.
And he doesn't get to get those guys touches because of who he is.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. And so I feel like just taking a little bit of that usage rate out of that position is going to put it into Nembhard's hands, Haliburton's hands, Siakam's hands. And I just feel like there's the boat lifts ever so slightly from an offensive standpoint because you're putting the ball into your moneymaker's hands a little bit more. And it has nothing to do with an anti-Mathurin take no matter
Yeah.
what our buddies that I've had a lot of anti-Mathurin takes over the year, but I really have over the years, but I really have come down on him. I've been super impressed by his play this year. That's sort of what makes me lean back towards Nesmith at this point in time.
That's a good point. That actually made me think a little bit differently about it. And the flip side of that would be, and Mathurin would get more touches with the bench, but like especially if McConnell is still, to put it nicely, struggling, having another
Yeah,
ball handler with
sure.
that group could be nice also, right? In terms
Yeah.
of what it means for other players. And you might have persuaded me. That's a pretty good point. Well, I'm gonna dig my feet in deeper just so I don't look stupid. Even though, like I said, I still just feel like in my gut of guts that Nesmith will start again at some point, just because of the value of 3-and-D players, and that's partially why I'm pretty high on Ben Shepard, which is my segue into what would you do with the rest of the rotation, John?
So this is the question that
This is the part.
really,
Sorry, this is the
yeah,
part that just sucks. Like
it
no
does.
one deserves what's going to happen to them. Continue.
Yeah. Our friend Dave Searle likes to say that losing looks like losing, right? And so when losing happens, and we like to talk about, we like to try to describe what's happening, but like at the end of the day, just losing looks like losing, and it just sucks, right? And like
Yep.
sometimes we just have to admit that. Like what we're gonna have to talk through is somebody gets screwed here, and it just sucks. I think Ben Shepard is a really good player. I think he's a useful player. I actually think he might be the player that the Pacers need to play come playoff time to make a long push in the playoffs. We saw him be a very useful player last year in the playoffs. I also think that big picture, Jarace Walker has more upside than Ben Shepard. I think both of these things can be true. I understand why Rick Carlisle trusts Ben Shepard more than Jarace Walker at this point in their respective careers. Ben Shepard is more. Uh, Coaches love players that are predictable, where where they're going to be,
Yes.
and you know what Ben Shepard's going to do. He's going to be in the correct spot defensively, which you want that a player in the lineup. Right? He's not going to get out over his skis too much offensively. And Jarace Walker, you can't say the same thing about him. But Jarace Walker has also shown flashes where like he could be the guy that's like, hey, who should be our starter? It's not Nesmith or Ben Mathurin. It's very obviously Jarace Walker, and it's not even close. Right? Like he could render that question so incredibly useless a year and a half, 2 years from now that like so my opinion is for this regular season, the Pacers need to decide, what are we, right? Do we think that we are like a legitimate Eastern Conference Finals contender? Or are we like a fringe Finals contender that like if some things break our way, maybe we can do it, but like we're really honestly still building. I mean, we're one of those two. I do feel like we can play with any team in the East, but I think the Pacers need to put Jarace Walker into the rotation, and you know what you have with Ben Shepard. You do. I don't think that's going to change if you put Walker into the rotation for a month and a half and he shows he doesn't have it. I think you can always go back to Ben Shepard at any point. To answer your question directly and specifically, I moved Ben Shepard out of the rotation, even though he's very good and he deserves to be in an NBA rotation. But a guy has got to be moved out, and I would move Ben Shepard out because for the long term of the Pacers' perspective, 2, 3, 4 years from now, we need to see what Jarace Walker has.
Can I know I've gone way long here. I'm so sorry. Can I ask you a question about what you just said? To be clear, everything you just said, I understand what you're saying. I'm going to give you a devil's advocate response. And I was having this debate with someone on Twitter. So I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Why does Jarace Walker have a higher ceiling than Ben Shepard? Because I get why. To be clear, as I ask the question, people are going to think I don't know. I do know why. But 3-and-D players are so valuable. And I made the case last year before the season as the Pacers were trying to figure out who was going to be their rotation last year, I said I would be building the rotation, making sure Aaron Nesmith is in, and then making other decisions from there, which is how you got to TJ McConnell being out, which was the right call at the start of the season last year. And Aaron Nesmith was a 3-and-D player, and Ben Shepard is a 3-and-D player, and that player's impact is really high. So I get that it's a ceiling thing. Like, I get what you're saying. I'm not actually asking this question. I'm just sort of asking, is it like just a ceiling argument, right? Is that what we're all really saying when we're saying that? Is that he's a higher ceiling, or is it actually like a healthy likelihood percentile thing? Because Ben Shepard was drafted as like, wow, this kid could really shoot at Belmont, and look how good his offense has been at the draft combine. And then he hit the NBA floor, and everyone's like, whoa, he can guard. And now it's like, if everybody knew that, he wouldn't have gone 26th. He would have gone higher than that, right? So I know the answer, but I'm working through it now with you. Why is that the case?
Okay, so I would say there's two things. So I first of all, I believe Jarace Walker has a higher ceiling, and I'll get to that in a second. But I actually think that there's already things that Jarace Walker does better than Ben Shepard does right now. So it's not just a ceiling play. I think it's also a current NBA player. Jarace Walker is better than Ben Shepard at certain things. Okay, at certain things. Number one, we have seen Jarace Walker in one-on-one defensive situations be able to bother ball handlers, like one-on-one scorers, in a way that Ben Shepard hasn't quite been able to. Ben Shepard, the way he navigates screens is incredible. He plays off-ball defense incredibly well. His help defense is much better than Jarace Walker, I think. Again, from you put Ben Shepard out there on the second or third best perimeter player, and he's going to be excellent. But Jarace Walker, you can throw him out there on Cade Cunningham for 3 minutes, and he can pick up 2-3 steals. You're not throwing Ben Shepard out there to guard Cade Cunningham for 3 minutes.
I agree.
You trust Ben Shepard to.
Ben Shepard, just for the first time ever, it was guarding Maxey, had a game where I was like, oh, his on-ball defense was like legitimately great on a good player. And that's only notable because it's the first time it happened, right? Not that it's much more rare than with Jarace. I agree with you.
Secondly, the playmaking. The playmaking, and Walker will still throw some terrible turnovers out there. He's going to make some really bad mistakes, but you've seen him see plays. I'm a big soccer guy. He can unlock a defense in ways that Ben Shepard, I don't think, will ever be able to. Jarace Walker can already do that. And I don't know that you necessarily need that on this year's Pacers, but that is a skill he does already have. And for like end of the shot clock with the bench unit, we've seen sometimes if TJ McConnell doesn't have it running, and if Mathurin is in the starting lineup, that bench unit does need a second guy like that to score, and it's not Ben Shepard. So I would say that there are those two things, those two skills specifically, that he's already better than Ben Shepard at. He's only going to get better at the other things with playing time. As far as like the ceiling, I think the shot is there. And I think the athleticism, I mean, you've seen, I just think, those are the things that we've seen flashes, we've seen glimpses. I love Ben Shepard. And there's a lot of people saying like we should do like a 2-for-1, a 3-for-1 package some of these deals. That there's probably some wisdom in that, but also you saw what happened earlier this season when we had injuries. You do that, you make a move like that, you're 1 or 2 injuries away from wishing that you had this depth back. So it's a tough situation to be in.
I agree. So the pro Jarace ceiling argument, whatever potential argument to me would be a lot of stuff you just said. Is he does stuff on the team that the theory of it is no one else can do this. Like literally no one on the team can guard like he can at times, both on ball and turning that into something else. He's got good hands. He's not as gambly this year. A forward with vision is great. He can shoot, even though it doesn't ever look like it's gonna be a go in. It goes in. Who cares what it looks like? Tyrese Haliburton's taught everybody that. That is a super valuable player. The case I've made for him for a while is like, if there's a 5% chance he's OG Anunoby, I could never trade him, right? Like that. Yeah. That's so hard to do. And Ben Shepard 3-and-D sounds great. there's not a chance he hits
Sure.
that level of thing. And that's where the difference lies in the ceiling discussion, is that Jarace Walker has size. He has size. Ben Shepard doesn't. And that is just innate to who they are as players. And so that, I think, is why you could say Shepard is better now, but Jarace has this size that in theory could make him better very soon. He's played 80 games in the NBA ever. But I think I think you're right that this is actually a discussion of what are they trying to be right now, because the on-court defensive rating for both those players this year is pretty similar for the team with them out there. But the offensive rating is way better for Ben Shepard. And a lot of their lineup combos are hey, Jarace is really hurting this group, because right now, when he has too many turnovers and he's inconsistent and the shot is up and down, so is Shepard's. He's under league average from 3 now. That is actually harder to fit him right now than anybody else. If the defense was consistent, it wouldn't be. So if they're just gunning for it this year, which maybe they should, they're fit, they could get to 4th in a good week, right? They made the conference finals last year. Then I think they go with the guy that helps them win now, which is Ben Shepard. And that's what they have done so far. But if they think that gap is closed between those two, then they should go to Walker. I think I'd do Ben Shepard because of that, because of the immediate wins. I've made that case on the internet a few times already. He has missed every shot he's taken since Nesmith came back, which is not helping his case, certainly. But the reason I think it's going to be that way is what you already said. Coaches want to know when they send a player to the scorer's table, what's this guy going to give me tonight? Ben Shepard doesn't touch the ball for 5 minutes when he's out there and plays the same way every time. It's just, I just think that you do make a compelling case. And I think it's a very, very, very close margin. I think those are the two guys. Even with McConnell struggles, you need that ball handler. They love the 2-point guard stuff. Right after, at Christmas, 10 days after they traded for Thomas Bryant, I said, what if they just go small and play Obi at the backup 5 and don't play Thomas Bryant? Then you get both of them out there. And now Thomas Bryant's unreplaceable on this team somehow. So it gets back to Jarace or Ben. And I think right this second would go Ben Shepard. If Jarace has a couple consistent performances or Shepard keeps missing, I might walk off that. And if the Pacers do go Jarace, I think that's fine, but it would show a longer term approach to this season and beyond. It's just, man, we should have led with this discussion. This has been good. It's just it's so tough, but such is life of the Aaron Nesmith return. And the discussion for me, I have no more points to make.
No, I don't strongly disagree with anything that you said. I would just say Ben Shepard is a consistent 3-point shot away from being a real 3-and-D guy.
Yeah.
35% from 3 this year, 31% from 3 last year. He was supposed to be a knockdown 3-point shooter out of Belmont. His shot's got that weird.
His shot feels like it's going into me, and
I know
his shot feels like it's going in and it doesn't, and Jarace's doesn't feel like it's going in and it does. That should have the number on the screen should matter to me more.
I hear you. So, yeah.
Alas, I do not envy the Pacers making these decisions, and they'll show us in these coming games. I want to ask Jarace Walker about what's Rick told him and how this is going to go. The Dean of Mortgages, John, thank you for way more time than I asked of you today. This is a great discussion. This got me thinking about both of these even more than I already have. Where can people find you and the things you have to say about basketball, mortgages, the Pacers, other stuff?
Dean of Mortgages on Twitter. That's pretty much it. Follow Tony. He does a great job, and follow the Locked On Pod. And appreciate you having me on. It was fun as always.
It was fun. I'm sad I can't make any more Paris jokes or say things in French anymore, but the people watching the game, I wanted them to feel just a little bit more immersed, I
loved it.
They're covering our game. And I know it made a lot of my American followers dude, shut up. You're doing too much. And they're right. I was doing too much, but whatever. I had fun with it. Tomorrow, actually, I haven't decided. One of the next 2 days, I'm going to talk about Siakam and Haliburton's all-star cases because reserves are getting named on Thursday. That really snuck up on me. The other day will be about credible. Let me repeat that into the microphone one more time. Credible rumors we've heard from actual plugged-in insiders about the Pacers ahead of the trade deadline. Not nonsense that you might have seen from nonsense people. Till then, give John a follow. I'll be back very soon. I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky at Tony R. East. And this podcast is a Twitter account at Locked On Pacers. Thanks for listening. See you soon.